friends and family, and welcome back to one more of our discussions on board. We are Chittalayam, and we're so excited to have you listening in today as we talk about mental health in the LGBTQA space. As always, we'll start off with a fun get to know you question so that all the panelists can introduce themselves and you can also hear a little bit more about us. So, the question for today is, what song do you hope plays every time you walk into a room? I'll go first. My name is Sia. And the song that I hope plays every time I walk into a room is the Mohit Chauhan classic from the movie Delhi 6, and it's Masakali. That's my answer for that question. Now I'm going to pass it off to Akshay, who will also be our moderator for the evening.
Thank you, Sia. Yeah, so the song I have in mind for when I enter is Dandanaka, which is like from a Tamil movie. It's a tribute to this actor named TR, and it's a genre movie. So it goes on from like Dandanaka Naka, and it's a good song that would get you into like a dancing mode, like a positive mode, and that's why I want that to be the song. And I'll pass it on to Ilakkiya.
Thanks, Akshay. Hello, everyone. I'm Ilakkiya. I'm a third-year student studying genetics, and I had a song in mind, Akshay, but now that you shared yours, I think I want to change mine. So I'm gonna now say the new song I would like to play when I enter a room is Pista, which is from a Tamil movie, and it's basically like a high-energy, fast-beat song that they play during a chase scene, and it's a comedy movie, so it's really funny. I think I'd like that song to play when I enter a room. Just like really high energy. The song starts off in a nice way. It's like builds up to the music. So I don't know. I think that'd be really cool. So I'll pass it on to Vyaas.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ilakkiya, because I had an English song in mind by Imagine Dragons, and when Akshay said the Tamil movie, I'm like, okay, let's ride that train. So I have this. So for Imagine Dragons, I'm gonna go. I'm a bit greedy, so I'm gonna give you two songs. So, Believer by Imagine Dragons, if it's English, like if I'm in America, or any other place that doesn't know Tamil, and if it's in India, then there's a song called Pokiri Pongal by from this film called Pokiri. So that's a really good feel like that gets your heart pumping, and it's a good way to start your day. So that's a good song.
Hi, first of all, thank you guys for having me. I'm Manasvini. I also go by Winnie. My pronouns are she, her, as mentioned. And the song that I would go with for this question is one called Raise Hell by Dorothy, because that truly represents me at family gatherings.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing the song. And so now let's get into the topic. The topic for today is LGBTQ plus and their mental health. So before we sort of go into the question, I do want to add a disclaimer that while answering these questions, if anybody was insensitive or ignorant, wait for them to finish their answers and then call their actions out. Don't call the person out, because we're all on the same team. We're working towards the same goal. With that, the first question is, what do each of these terms, LGBTQ, like what do they mean? And do you guys know anyone from the LGBTQ plus community?
I mean, the acronym, it's a very long one. Of course, it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. And then I think they also have, you can either write it as LGBT or LGBTQ plus, and it also sometimes involves the IA, which is intersex, and then there's asexual and aromantic. Does not stand for ally, contrary to popular belief. And yes, I mean, I do know a lot of people from the community. I mean, yours truly included, but also I don't have a lot of.
Thank you for sharing that. Ilakkiya?
Yeah, I can, I guess, add a little more, definitions, to each of them in case anyone watching doesn't know. So lesbian stands for, two women, women who are attracted to other women. Gay stands for men who are attracted to other men. Bisexual means you're attracted to two different genders of people. Transgender, or shortened to trans, I'll probably say trans more often, that it refers to people whose gender identity does not align with what sex they were assigned at birth. So it's like you're assigned male at birth, but you identify as a female. And Q is for queer. I've also heard it could stand for questioning, people who are questioning their gender identity, sexual orientation, things like that. And queer would be for any minority of people who do not fall in the heterosexual or cisgender category of people. Where heterosexual means you're attracted to the other gender in terms of like the male female like majority. So so heterosexual means you're male attracted female, female attracted male. And cisgender means your gender identity aligns with what sex you were assigned at birth. So for example, I'm cisgender because I was born female and I identify as a female. So a little bit about those terms. And yes, I do know people in the LGBTQ community. I have friends who are bisexual and transgender.
Thank you for sharing the definition, and it is good that you share like the anecdote of like who you know. I can go next with saying I have had like a gay supervisor. Have had lesbian roommates. I have some bi friends. I've met transgender, but I don't really know them. I know anyone personally. But that's all I know from the community. Who wants to go next?
Oh, I can go. Everyone's already covered the definitions really well. And with nuance, the only thing I'd like to add for the context of the conversation is that I identify as bisexual.
Does anybody else have anything else to add?
I forgot that I've had a supervisor who is gay, so I'll add that as well.
Okay. Thanks so much for sharing this. So now we'll go to the second question. What are the myths and misconceptions of LGBTQ plus?
I have notes.
Manasvini?
I have notes for this one. So I think the community is quite surrounded by harmful stereotypes, not just by people who are cisgendered or heterosexual, but also within the community as well. And two things that I often see, where people from the LGBTQ community stereotype others in the same community is when they're really prejudiced against bisexuals or pansexuals because they don't neatly fit into a box. And I find that ironic because the whole point of having a community like this is so that you don't have to be in a box and you don't have to stick by a certain label or only go for certain people. And I think that sort of fluidity or that openness is something that's not taken very well. People are like, oh, no, you have to either like one or the other, and that's very restrictive, I feel. And another one that I see, maybe not within the community but outside, is that it's not all about sex. Like romantic attraction is different from sexual attraction, and sometimes those things align. You may be a bisexual woman who is attracted to one or more gender and also sexually attracted to the same. That may align, but sometimes that may not align. You might be asexual, but you may still want romantic relationships, and you may have a preference with who you want a romantic relationship. And I guess lastly, I'd like to say that it's not deviance from the norm. I know that this is generally the definition, and it comes from us often being told that cisgender and heterosexual is the default, but there shouldn't be a default.
That was really well answered, Manasvini.
Thank you.
And especially the last point, I like where you're talking about how we tend to assume what should be the norm and that people are different from the norm, but everything should be accepted as like possibilities and normal, equally likely, just equally respected, mainly.
And another thing that I've noticed coming up recently is that, this new generation, everyone is coming out as gay or bi, but you don't know if there are actually more people who identify with these terms, or if people are just more comfortable coming out now because it's slightly more accepting than it used to be. So that's another thing. It's not like more people are turning queer, it's that people are okay with.
That is a very good point, and I do want to add that you don't really get to choose your sexuality. It's not like who you are, and So like that is one of the reasons why, coming out is sort of like a big thing, because it's not that they're trying to sort of like tell you this is what I want to be. It's not like an aspiration, but rather it's just like, telling a bit about like who they are. It's like, like I'm right-handed, that sort of thing. And I also know even people like, even if you're right-handed, you can like, switch to left hand, like that sort of thing, where like, whereas with this, you can't do that. And one thing I found on like on the internet, which is like sort of some people think of it as a mental illness, because it's like sort of like just like on your head or something, and like that's not true either. It's not a mental illness. It's just like people being people. And then like I do want to add one more thing, which is like sort of like homosexuality is like not just like some things that just humans do, like animals do it too. Like it's like uniform like everywhere, and it's important that we don't minimize them. And that's why like Manasvini's point is very, very important, that we don't think as uh, cisgendered things, or like like being straight as like the default, and everything else is like not the norm, because in their life that is like the normal thing. Do you guys have anything else to add? Ilakkiya?
So a few other misconceptions that I've heard is like trans people, that they're just confused. They maybe at least something that I've heard before is like men are not heard, seen. There's gender disparity in the way that men and women are treated. And so because of that, if people transition from female to male, they'll say, oh, it's because you want something from that community. It's not like your personal identity. And that people are confused, but that is very much not true. It is it's like a really big struggle for the trans community to, I guess, come out and transition, because there's so much stigma and stereotypes, and a lot of not there's not much acceptance, I would say, from family and friends. Speaking from the friends that I know who are trans, so it's no one would willingly lie about something that would cause, like, it causes a lot of mental stress and anguish to work through and come out about. So trans people are not confused. That's a big myth that I'm aware of. And I was also looking up some more ones, and something I found on the internet was that apparently there's a myth that same-sex parents would be harmful to a child's upbringing, since they won't model typical gender roles within a family and the parents. But that is not true. Plenty of societal expectations and statements about what typical gender roles or sex roles in the family are. So they don't necessarily need parents to be the only models of that. So false advertising there.
You do bring up a very good point. Sia?
One of the other misconceptions I've heard is that there is a supposed, it's kind of a slippery slope where people will say, oh, if this is legalized, then what's next? And I find that argument to be extremely flawed, in the sense that it resembles a very erroneous logic about, oh, if we do this, then the immediate next step is going to be that. And then they don't think about, all of these other mechanisms we have in place to not let the world move in a direction that is harmful to people's ability to give consent, or human rights in general. So I find that misconception to be a little bit harmful. It also comes up with correlations to violence or correlations to deviant behavior, as Manasvini has mentioned, and that has been debunked so many times. And we'll put some links in the YouTube description for you as well, just to see, some figures and some statistics that'll help combat that misconception. The last one that I hear the most from people around me who are still, learning about my identity or hear about it for the first time is, oh, you should, okay, then just keep it to yourself. Keep it to yourself. Don't celebrate it. This is not something worth celebrating. It's not something worth you going out to marches about, or you telling everyone in your life about. And then I think about how many images of heterosexuality that we see growing up that are so normalized. Like if you're growing up and people will say, oh, I can't, who are you going to marry? Do you have a boyfriend? When you're not even, you aren't even in 10th grade, and, your family members will do that to you. or all the movies have, sexualized representation of, straight couples. So I, again, I think that's a very flawed idea of what the community is, and the community deserves to, after years and years of not being able to identify with who they are and stifle a part of their being just so they can be safe, just so they won't die, just so that they won't be ostracized. I think it is allowed and very justifiable for this identity to be something that people are very openly proud of and are finding support through, celebrating it and being actively involved in the community.
You bring up a very important point. Representation is very important, because when you grow up, you want to see people who are like you, and when you don't have that opportunity, it is very hard, and that's like one of the things that makes them like, oh wait, maybe I should hide this part of myself, and that's why it's very important to have the representation. Vyas, do you have a point to add?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things. So great points mentioned by everyone, and so the idea of people who are in the LGBT community who identify as LGBTQ. So the idea that they are possessed by some devil or an evil spirit, and it's something it's something that can be cured is a big misconception, in the sense that like you can't drive it out, like like many people who have like you guys have said on this call. So you can't drive that out, because it's just like you're born with it, and you can't change it in any way. And so that's a big thing that people face. And so the second thing is the idea that the point that Akshay mentioned, where he said it's viewed as a mental illness. So when we look at these topics, it's important to understand, we look towards what's the evidence behind, calling this an illness or not. So till about 1978, so the DSM-5, so which categorizes and defines mental illnesses and disorders. So, LGBT people, part of who identified as gay and lesbian in those times, so that was considered as a mental illness till 1978. So it took them about 40, 50, 60, 70, 100, 200 years to understand that this is not an illness. So this is something that we need to help people. So people ostracizing them or being prejudiced against them brings about mental illness. So they confused the idea of them identifying as LGBT, and so the mental harm they created resulted in other mental illnesses. So that's what we need to address, and not putting this in a box. So they changed that in 1978. So it's very recent, like it's just about one generation. So it's important to not blindly believe all the evidence. So it's good to talk to people and understand, because scientists may be wrong too, or psychologists may be wrong too. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It is an important point, because it coming out, sorry, it coming out as like not being a mental illness, like that allowed people to have the ability to, okay, I can now come out now, and because that's who I am, and not because I have a flaw and I want to share that with you. And that's very important. So we have talked about like the things, the hardship that they've gone through, the myths that they've had. So they are part of a community where they have to hide a part of themselves, and their existence is invalidated time and time again. So what effect does that have on their mental health?
Just generally, with the way stats are, people who are a part of the LGBTQ community are at a greater risk of things like substance abuse, self-harm, suicide, than their cisgender and heterosexual counterparts. And I think constantly having to hide a part of yourself and not being able to tell anybody something that forms such a big part of your identity, it really prevents you from living really authentically. And initially when you hear a lot of these coming out stories, a lot of people, when they realize that they are not cisgender or not heterosexual, and the first reaction from society towards these kinds of people is negative. There's like a negative connotation attached to that. So perhaps initially in the coming out stage they try to suppress it or they try to change it, and try to make themselves fit in with something that they're not. And I think that's quite exhausting, and it can also be quite isolating to not have anybody around you who understands. And I think, drawing from Vyas's point in the last question, where these things have been pathologized and seen as illnesses for so long, there's actually one thing I wanted to add is that it is like one part of it that is still pathologized right now, and it's quite controversial, is trans experiences, and the whole thing of gender dysphoria being classified as a mental illness in the DSM, right? As of now, and the implication there is that they're sort of trapped in the wrong body, or their gender identity has developed incorrectly, and that's quite harmful to people of the trans community while they're finding their identity and growing up. And but the catch is that if you don't have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a mental health professional, it limits your access to treatment. So if they don't get that sort of approval that they have this sort of condition, they won't have access to gender affirming surgery or hormone therapies or anything that they need to exist authentically as the gender that they identify as. So that I think takes a big toll, especially on trans youth.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And what you said about trans, it is very important. I did not know that till now, and so thank you for sharing that. And seeing that, that would definitely have an effect. And again, to my earlier point, like this is basically saying, like you have a flaw, and that is like not the right way to like look at this. What do the others think?
I've also noticed that there are some people in life who have trouble differentiating between what is an identity and what's a label. And sometimes they take coming out with an identity as a way to extrapolate that into, so if you're saying you're this, you must also be doing these things. And sadly, all of the things that are associated with the LGBTQ plus community in most circles, unfortunately, are not very positive. So you're not only taking on the burden of expressing what makes you happy, but you're also taking on the burden of additional judgment that may be beyond just your sexuality or your orientation, the burden of what people think that is associated with the thing, and how that changes dynamics in your lives, how that changes how people perceive you. Unfortunately, being part of this community is one of those things where you can almost expect that people make judgments based on you coming out. So that can be a lot to take on for someone who's just trying to find a space in the world by saying, oh, I love this. This is a part of who I am. And I don't know if there's many other huge identities that we have to do that with, because this is it's all about, oh, what happens behind closed doors and what's going to harm, people in society. Those questions are much more likely to be raised when someone just says, this is who I love. So that definitely affects your mental health in terms of, it can cause some cognitive dissonance in terms of, oh, if I'm this, then do I also have to be this? And then if I'm saying this, do I have to subscribe to all of these behaviors? And then if I don't, is my identity invalidated? So yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree to that. Just because like you say someone's like gay, then like I do sort of like know with like gay also they have to be like stylish, they have to be fashionistas, those sort of things. So they no man, like just a basic label, like the basic definition that goes with it. Everything else they get to define themselves because you get to define it for yourself, and so it's need to give them the same thing as well. One other thing, it's like an earlier point that was made, like in the first one, which is these people get invalidated, and even like for like bi, like they get invalidated even among the LGBTQ plus community, which is there was like one college humor video I watched about this where you're like, hey man, come on, like pick a side. Do you want girls? Do you want guys? Like pick a side, and then we'll support you from there. If you're gay, then okay, cool. Like you guys. If you're lesbian, I mean, if you like girls, if you are a guy and you like girls, and like okay, you're straight, you do a thing, but pick a side, and like that sort of thing. Invalidation is given like not just like like by people who are like not allies, but like even people part of the community, and like that is having an effect because as I forgot who made this point, but like like that definitely affects your mental health, and that makes them like more susceptible to like mental health issues because this is a problem in their life that like half the people won't even be able to empathize with, and they just have to live with it. Anybody else have anything else to add? Ilakkiya?
So everyone made really good points about all the different ways that people who are part of the LGBTQ plus communities, mental health can be affected by different societal expectations and experiences they have. And I guess I wanted to kind of go more into detail on point Manasvini made about like it's a big part of your identity, right? So if such a big part of your identity needs to be hidden or camouflaged or you need to hide it in general. You can't talk to a lot of people about it. It can cause a lot of self-image related issues where you don't really, it's hard for you, just like such a big disconnect between who you are and the way you might portray yourself to the world, depending on where in the world you are and how accepting your society is. So that can lead to a lot of self-image related stress, doubt, pain, and being able to have that validated can reduce so much stress that people who are cis and heterosexual don't have to experience every single day, right? Because you're able to be more present in a space. So honestly, like even this is really simple, but my name gets misspelled a lot, and even that simple thing makes me feel really upset, right? Sometimes, and imagine someone's entire identity being invalidated and disregarded and mislabeled and misrepresented, right? So that I can't. It's probably a lot more stress. And I've also read that healthcare providers have a lot of can often disrespect and disregard members of the LGBTQ plus community, so they don't feel safe even going to get health healthcare from different healthcare providers. So that's also something that even if they are struggling, they can't go get help.
Yeah, this is like very sad to hear, and like one of the things that like Ilakkiya said like at the end, that it's called like internal bias, which is like sort of the bias that you have that from the community that you grew up in, and if the community grew up and had the bias against LGBTQ plus, then even though consciously you don't, internally it's something that you would have internalized, and that could sometimes be a problem. How to deal with parents who have a bias against LGBTQ during the lockdown?
For the clarification on the question, are you just talking about someone who is a part of the LGBTQ community and them dealing with their parents, or just any person dealing with parents who
Oh
have
no,
a bias?
like uh, like parents who have a bias against LGBTQ because the kids like they're part of the LGBTQ community, and they also know that their parents have a bias against it.
I guess I'd just like to start off by saying that there's no wrong or invalid way of handling this as long as your own safety is the priority. Because when it comes to people who are a part of the LGBTQ community, and especially queer and trans youth who are still dependent on their parents, safety becomes the biggest concern. You don't want to be abused emotionally, mentally, physically. You still need the resources that they're giving you. So, if in order to preserve your own safety and well-being, it's okay to avoid discussions on this topic. If you are out to your parents and they are still not accepting of this, perhaps you could limit your discussions to not include these topics, or you could limit the amount of time that you spend with them if they're hurting you in some way. And if you're not out to them, there's no obligation to come out. I mean, in general, there's no obligation for a queer person to come out to anybody if they don't feel ready, if they don't feel like it's right. And these discussions can be quite exhausting to someone who is queer, because in a way you're trying to justify your existence and why you should be allowed to occupy space in this world, which no one should have to do. And I think if avoiding these discussions or limiting the amount of time, uh, like it preserves your safety and your well-being, by all means, I think you should go ahead and do that, and find sources of support outside the home that you can count on.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is like very important that if you're not getting the support from your parents, hopefully you would be able to like find communities like online through Reddit or Facebook or like other things. I would also say that like from minimizing your emotions, minimizing a part of your identity, sometimes your life does get hard, and at that point, like at no point you're like let it allow to go to like self harm. Self harm is like not a good way of, is not a good coping mechanism, irrespective of like what it is. So like try, like if self harm like sounds like the best idea like to do, that means that you are in a space where you're not like you're not you're basically not at the right space. So that means that you have to change something, like you change your location, change your background, exchange something, like maybe like, maybe finding the community that helps you get out there. I'm not saying all coping mechanisms are bad. Coping mechanisms are there because like there's a reason for it, but don't use self-harm as a coping mechanism. What about others? Do you guys have anything to add?
If it comes to the point where people can be very insistent about these things, so say you found the courage to have this conversation and it's already out there, and now you're living in a space where that's no longer welcome, and it's been, people can get very insistent about invalidation, and sometimes when someone's very consistent and very confident about their points, it can cause you very naturally to second guess yourself, or it can cause you very naturally to give up that part in a way, or to stifle if possible. But it the internet is a wonderful place, like Manasvini said, to just get that support that you might not be able to. And it's really tough to admit that you might not get support from the places that you really needed, which is the people in your life that you're closest to. But unfortunately, if that happens, then do everything you can to find the support you need. And that might be through the internet, but I promise you, like, finding connection on there is much better than denying that part of yourself.
Yeah, I think Manaswini and Sia, they mentioned some great points, because ideally the way people might operate if their parents are in if their parents are homophobic. So they would ideally limit their interactions by leaving very very early to work or and coming back late at night. So that is a very that is something that people have missed during lockdown. So I don't know any personal stories, but I was just reading a couple of articles, and people in the UK where you had the parents talking about the devil, driving out the devil like in front of that person. So those are stories that really touched me in a way that I felt no one should ever go through. So these stories are happening everywhere, and especially harder in countries where this is not even recognized. So yeah, it's definitely tough. I don't have an answer. Like they said, online communities, they can help, but yeah, talking to a real person, that's much better in my opinion, some way, if you can find that. Yeah.
We talked about like how hard it is, like like with coming out and everything, like during lockdown. But coming out is like hard at any point. So the question here is, what effect does coming out have on mental health, like the before and the after?
I think that's quite a subjective experience because I feel like the effect that coming out has on your mental health is quite contingent on the reactions that you get to coming out. So if you have a a supportive group of friends or you have family support and everyone around you accepts that as just another part of who you are and doesn't make a huge hue and cry about it, I'm sure the outcome there in terms of mental health would be much better. And I think coming out in general for many people due to conservative mindsets at home, the culture is not always safe. So it is a risk to do so. And when you do get that negative reaction, I don't think a person would feel validated, a person would feel wrong about themselves. And of course, if they've already been feeling like, who I am is wrong, getting that feedback from people around you will further drive in the point that something is inherently wrong with me. I cannot exist like this. So, yeah, it can lead to a lot of adverse outcomes depending on the reaction.
Thank you for sharing that, and I agree with you. One thing that you should do, like I mean, like the thing that you want to receive is that uh, hopefully they accept you for who you are, and that's like the big part of coming out. And it is like not an easy thing because they've taken this long to come out because they thought any time before you probably would have rejected it, and it took this long to be like, you know what, maybe there's a sliver, like slight chance that you might accept you know the person for who they are, and like that is it's like sort of thing where like it's sort of like you're touching the waters, like when you're going into a swimming pool, and then if it's like really cold and then like somebody's like screaming, then it's like that's not gonna help. And so it's sort of the same thing if you do this thing where like with the coming out, you're like like this is not a place to like like sort of like, oh my god, like what the hell, like how could you do this, like I don't know you anymore. Those are not good responses. Good responses, like I mean, there's a lot of good responses, but like one way is like, like I accept you for who you are, thank you for sharing. um Anybody else?
It's kind of like this. It's kind of like the chicken and egg problem, like Akshay said. So people coming out is kind of an effect of them having a circle who are supportive in some way, maybe at least one or two people. So those one or two people can somehow mitigate the negative reactions they receive from the others. If they don't have that circle, then they're not going to come out. So it's sort of that testing the waters thing, and it plays into which country they're in and where they're living. So they might move to another country where they're studying, and there they might be comfortable coming out. And there might be places where they come out to only to a select group of friends and not to their parents. So there's a lot of variations in terms of how they come out, and I guess the reaction is subjective as well, like Manasvini said. So it's kind of hard to say how they feel after that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I do also want to add, like sometimes like I do have this thing which is like this thing to show that I'm like a LGBTQ plus ally, which is something that I got in this fair I had like in my university. And like there's sometimes like people tend to show they are an ally through other ways too, and maybe like coming out to them first might give you, at least give you the experience where like you want your first coming out experience to be a good one, because if not it's going to be even harder. So maybe you can do it with people that you already know have already accepted these people. I'll go to Sia and next I'll go to Ilakkiya.
Vyas and Akshay made the points that I was hoping to make, and they took my thoughts and they put a ribbon on them. So beautiful. Well done. I will pass this off.
So I guess we were talking about like the ways it can possibly go wrong. And like some of the ways it can go right, like Vyaas was saying, is it can self-acceptance and validation is good, right? Humans are social creatures. We rely a lot on the ways we interact with people and how they interact with us. So if you have a positive reaction and the people are very accepting, then it can definitely help with all like self-image related stress to some extent. Again, it really depends on if everybody you come out to is very accepting. Your family, your friends, your school, your college, your colleagues, like all of them are accept. Like whoever you come out to, if they're accepting, it'll help a lot. It can relieve a lot of mental stress and make it easier for the person to live authentically. They're probably gonna be happier as well because they don't have to constantly hide something. And something I've seen on a bunch of TV shows that do feature characters who are part of the LGBTQ community is that sometimes when they do come out to friends and they're close friends, they might react with, "Oh, why didn't you tell me earlier? You know, why didn't you trust me? You know," and like that is one way of reacting, but in that case, the person is making it all about themselves. Of like, "Oh, you didn't trust me enough. Was I not a good enough friend?" And you're kind of asking this person who just came out and shared a big part of their identity to now affirm your identity and who you are and like how good of a friend you are. So I guess if anyone comes out to you, respond with affirming them and responding to them and put your emotions on the back seat. Stop making it about yourself. It doesn't matter if you were friends for a week or your entire life since the day you were born. Just focus on the individual who's coming out.
Also, I think if you are
Go for it.
so I think if you are a part of the LGBTQ community, you know that coming out isn't really a one-time thing. You have to keep doing it for the rest of your life. And yeah, I know, shocker, right? Because you thought it would be this one event and then you could just leave it behind. But no, you have to keep coming out to different people. So I think that the reaction and the outcome will be different each time.
I just want to add, sometimes, with Ilakkiya's point, like they might be saying, how could you not trust me? That could also come from low self-esteem or, like anxiety, like from that side. But generally, like hopefully, like that's not a great way to react. But, like if you do react, like maybe there are reasons to it. So like maybe like look into that. We talked about coming out and, sometimes it does go wrong. And so like do people in the LGBT community like go through the grief cycle when somebody close to them has homosexuality as a deal breaker? Because basically, like say you're someone who you're really close with, you tell them, hey, you come out to them, but then after that they don't accept you for who you are, and like they they break the relation. So like what happens there?
Ooh, I've got a story for this one. And obviously I'm laughing about it because that's how I'm coping with, losing somebody in my life when I told them about my identity. So this was somebody that I grew up with. I went to the same school as them, and we went to an all-girls school. And I think I only started being a lot more open about my identity once I was at Purdue and I was in college. Before that, I didn't talk about it a lot. I only told very, a trusted few people. And it was the day that homosexuality was legalized in India. I should say decriminalized, right? It was decriminalized in India. And I remember leaving my classroom in tears when I heard about it. And the first thing I do was get on my Instagram. And so I put up a post and I was like, oh my God, finally, this is happening. I'm so happy. And then I heard from this person and then they said, what are you talking about? Why do you care about it so much? And I was like, I'm bisexual. And at that point I was actually seeing a woman. And I was like, yeah, I have been seeing people and this is a part of me. I didn't tell a lot of people. And they immediately blocked me. And I never heard from them again. I never have. They blocked me on everything. And so it was kind of shocking for me to like go through that high of, wow, something that's so important to me has been decriminalized in my country, to then, wow, now I'm losing people because I am showing people that I'm happy about it. So that grief is very real, right? Or even when you're developing friendships with people, I try to be very open in terms of the kinds of people that I want to be friends with. I know you can't always agree on things, and I like to say that I have friends from all different walks of life for the most part. But a lot of the times, if they're religiously maybe more conservative, then if I'm developing a budding friendship and then that topic comes up, and then I see their interest in the friendship or the connection drop, ah, that is painful. That is really painful. But you have to remember that sometimes it's not worth it to spend the emotional energy to convince people like that to stay in your life, because if they had the empathy to look beyond things that they might not necessarily do for themselves and just accept that that's a part of who you are and not try to change it, then you wouldn't probably, you wouldn't be in this place to begin with. So yeah, definitely that grief is very real. And if you felt it, I empathize with you. I'm so sorry that people aren't nicer about this.
Thank you so much for sharing this story. I can't even comprehend how hard it would be in just like share the story. So like to actually go through it is would be even terrible. I want to say sorry for like that person, for that happening. And if anybody's listening, you had the experience, like I'll say sorry for them. Uh, uh, of course, you might not hear like the sorry, you may not hear them apologize you like from them. So like hopefully at least like me saying it helps you. And I don't want like I kind of want this to be the end of this question, because I want this question to be just about this. Thank you so much for like sharing this story. How important is it that the loss of your country is a LGBTQ plus ally?
I mean, any sort of legislation or legislative body or government should not really be bringing their personal opinions when it comes to governing a country, even if they are against homosexuality or being queer. Uh, you that shouldn't be interfering with how you run a country, because the duty of the government is to take care of all people, no matter what community they belong to. And right now, the system is structured to exclude marginalized communities, and one of them being the LGBT. So this limits their access to employment, healthcare, rights like marriage and adoption. And they're just not acknowledged, because the default is seen as okay, man, women, children. But then what about people who don't want that sort of life, or rather they don't conform to that norm? And also with the decriminalization of 377 recently in India, I don't think that would really count as acceptance. It's more like tolerance. It's just a nod in a general direction, because they're like, okay, you're not doing anything illegal, but that's about it.
Simply put, very, very important for a country to be an ally of the LGBTQ community. Because like Manasvini was talking about, you could be considered a criminal for your identity in some countries if the law is not on your side, right? So that's a big thing. Adoption laws as well. Like, there are so many things based on the premise of a man marries a woman, and there's different things regarding that. And if that's part of the law, then it makes it really hard for anybody who's part of the community to do a lot of daily things. They have way more struggles, or they just can't do it, period. Right? So things like insurance policies that cover different like gender reassignment surgeries or mental health care access, and like the government can play a role in that. They can allow marriages to happen. They can create employment laws that say you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, ability, anything like that. So laws can play a really big role, and laws again will not be the only thing, right? Because even now, if it's the law change will results in tolerance, then again, it's like the law can only do so much. The society also needs to change and follow suit, but it can start with the law changing, making it compulsory for different people to start doing things. You'll then end up creating a lot of internal bias will become probable, because if it's legally not acceptable to be homophobic, right? Then you might become an internalized homophobic. And how do you deal with that? So education, a lot of things the government can do to educate people, to make things legal, and not decriminalize, and support people actively instead of just saying we'll tolerate your presence.
It's a sort of thing where if you look at a baby and then say this baby is doing crimes, if you are able to say that, that's basically the thing that you're saying here too. So just because they're old enough, they were born that way, and so just because they're old enough now, they're like, you know what, now I can like have a stigma against them. Maybe when they were scared, like, no, I can't have that. Like that would seem inhuman, but like now that they're old enough, you know what, now I can do it, and that's like not the right way to look at it.
So I was just looking up some stats because I didn't know, and it was really interesting to see that that it's still criminalized in 72 countries, and 20 countries had led the way in legalizing it before 1900. So that's something that I didn't expect. So including France, Belgium, Netherlands, Brazil, Argentina. And it's important to note that laws are just, like, it's just legislation, and they don't really they're only as good as how well they're upheld. So just because a country has laws that decriminalize or legalize, it still doesn't mean that it's a safe place or safe country to be in. So those people still do face lack of access to essential amenities and basic rights. So even taking surveys can be hard in countries where it's very difficult. So even people who go out and survey communities in, say, parts of Africa or Middle East, so it's very difficult to get actual data on how people are feeling or how the laws are.
I want to add just a little more, like specific examples. So, like in the U.S., they've made it so that any transgender kids are not allowed to play in sports that they kind of in the gender that they identify with, and this is terrible. Some states said they would have to do a general inspection before letting kids play in sports, which is terrible. That's harassment. That's sexual harassment of kids to play in sports. That's something that's very much anti-LGBTQ. There's something called the gay panic defense, which allows people who attack members of the LGBTQ community to state that person's identity as the cause for this person attacking them. And it's legal to just attack someone on the basis of their identity. And that's I think there's only 12 states so far that have banned that defense in the US. So that's what, 38 states that still have it legal-ish. So these are all the different ways that this country's rights are very important to how the LGBT community is accepted and treated in the country and supporting them.
I love going first for closing thoughts. Closing thoughts. If you are human, which you probably are, if you're listening to this, and someone comes out to you, or you're coming out yourself, and you don't know how to do it, or you don't know how to react, it's perfectly okay to say, "Thank you for telling me. Give me some time to respond to this." It is totally okay to not have it down pat about how you can empathize with people if something hits you out of nowhere. It's okay to take your time. Be kind to yourself. If people don't immediately jump on board with something that you're telling them, just know that you are worth basic human rights, dignity, love, peace, happiness, all of those good things, regardless of whether people agree that you should be a certain way or not. So just do whatever it takes to find the support that you need. Know that you're valid and know that you're important. So yeah, that's my closing thought. Thank you everyone for sharing all the things you did today. I also learned a lot.
I think my closing thoughts would be, if you want to be a better ally to the community, the most important thing to do is listen to people from the community and educate yourself using sources that people from the queer community have curated. And that is not to say you can go and ask them every single question and make them do emotional labor by them having to explain things to you all the time. But I think you would learn a lot more from the lived experiences of people from the community rather than things that the media shows you, or cis-het people's interpretation of what the community is. So yeah, just keep an open mind and open ears.
For me, my closing thoughts is that each of these LGBTQ, IA, all of these have their own problems, their own struggles. So we have solved just like like tip of the iceberg. That's all we've talked about today, and there's so much more. And one of the ways like I actually learned a lot about this. As I said earlier, like with my anecdotal who I know stuff. So with my gay supervisor, like a few months into it, like, I actually asked him a question. Hey man, like I accept you for who you are, but like I just want to ask questions because I actually don't know anyone, and you're the only one I know, and so I want to ask you questions. Are you okay with it? And then I asked him like a few questions, and then like he shared with me, and he like later he actually said like that was a good conversation, and I'm glad you asked in that way. I'm glad you actually asked me because there are certain things like it's the best way to answer it, like get the answers is from the actual person. And like it's a sort of thing where like if you have an achievement, then you're like talk about the achievement. So it's a sort of thing where like you would be able to talk about it, where you look at it with like the eyes of acceptance, and not just like so what's wrong with you, tell me, like is this part wrong with you, or is that part wrong with you? Like see it from the right eyes, let them know that you're seeing them with the right eyes, and hopefully it goes well.
The topic that we discussed today kind of ties into a lot of the topics that Chittalaya has discussed in the past, where we discussed burnout, depression, and then anxiety, trauma. So it's this topic that we just discussed is kind of it's it pretty much combines all those things. If someone who identifies as LGBT, so they might work hard, they might try to block people around them by working hard, and that might lead to burnout, right? So, or they might feel that they need to work twice as hard to get the same level of status, or if someone's PhD, they might not be recognized. So those things will lead them to work much harder. So that kind of leads to burnout, and there's cases where they might face anxiety, things like that. So this topic kind of ties into a lot of the other things that we discussed in the past. And listening, like Manasvini and like all of you said, listening helps, and listening with active listening without judgment helps. And putting a comma if you don't know how to answer or how to respond is a good way to, instead of a full stop, can help the conversation move forward.
Really nice thoughts from everyone. I guess I'd like to highlight the point of this: people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, they didn't choose this. This isn't something they saw somewhere and they decided to do. This is part of their identity. This is who they are. It's how they're born. I hope you can recognize that all the things that you might experience, I'm assuming majority of the viewers are probably heterosexual, cisgender people. So like the things that you experience, and it's just an accepted part of your life, right? You're not questioned about it, and they're just things you're born with. So similarly, in that respect of accepting without questioning or doubting, it's very important for the LGBTQ community. So there's a lot of different ways that the experiences you have differ from people in the LGBTQ community, and if you find out how they differ, try to see if there are ways that you can reduce that difference in your community, the people you talk with, your friends, and just there's a lot of ways you can do general acceptance, right? Like putting pronouns so that it's not just people who are transgender who have to specify their pronouns. All people specify their pronouns. That's one way you can show support. You can normalize being a part of the LGBTQ community in your daily life. Be mindful, say folks instead of ladies and gentlemen. That's everybody. So there are many ways that you can normalize being a part of the LGBTQ community. Find what they are, start doing it. You'll help a lot of people around you.
I've learned a lot through this discussion. Thank you so much for coming today, for taking some time out of your lives to do this. I hope the viewers liked it. I hope, because I really like being part of this discussion. Thanks so much for watching. You have a wonderful day.
Thanks for watching. For more discussions, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Also, make sure to like and comment more topics that you'd like to see us discuss. We'll see you next time.